Welcome back to The Bridges Between Us, a podcast from CaringBridge sharing real stories from real people navigating health journeys. Stories about caregiving, connection, uncertainty, and the many ways support shows up when life changes unexpectedly. My name is Andy Tiemann. This week I'm here with Mason Branstrator. 5 years ago, a ski accident left Mason paralyzed from the waist down. But from the moment he woke up in the hospital, he already had a plan. He couldn't feel his legs, but he refused to let that stop him. You might wonder if those were dark days, and they were. But what surprised me most about Mason wasn't the difficulty, it was the grit. A fire burned so brightly in him it's almost hard to look away. His family stood by his side then, and they're still there today. In fact, today, Mason is sharing the microphone with his mom. But Mason's story isn't just about strength or family or any one thing. It's about the full weight of it all. The pride and the grief, the resilience and the exhaustion, the determination and the vulnerability. All of it together, that's Mason. And he's just getting started. Why don't you take us back to that day?
Yeah, so I'd been skiing for maybe like 5 or so years. How many years?
I don't know.
We don't know. Yeah, I'd been skiing for about 5 years. I wasn't an incredible skier by any means, but I knew how to get around and I like to hit jumps. And it was just something I did for fun with my friends, and so I went out. It was January 18th, 2021. I was 17, junior in high school. It was the middle of COVID, and it was Martin Luther King Day, so we had the day off. Went out. It was icy. On the first run of the day, I just decided to hit a jump. And the last thing that I remember thinking before going off was, I'm going a little bit fast. And that was the last thing that I remember before hitting the jump, landing on my back, breaking T12, so right at my waist level, becoming paralyzed. And everything changed from that moment on. I had absolutely no clue what paralysis really meant, what was happening. I don't remember actually getting injured, but I was kind of yelling out in pain saying, "Are my legs broken?" I just didn't know. I had no clue what was happening. I just knew something was wrong. When I woke up the next day in the hospital, it was like us as a family had to decide, what do we do now? What are the next steps? What has to happen? That was kind of the turning point, and mom and the rest of my family at that point stepped up and said, okay, what do we need to do?
Stacy, tell me how that hit you.
Woo! Well, first of all, I was the person who bought the ski passes. During COVID, I think people probably can remember that you were wondering, what in the world can we do? How are we going to get our kids through this? How we had all sorts of safety precautions, pods that weren't allowed to come over to the house, and tracking like we were CDC or something on our own. And so we thought that skiing would be great. There's probably, since I'm mentioning it, some survivor piece there in it for me that wish this hadn't happened. And yet at the same time, from the moment that this injury occurred, there's a few things. There's so many gifts in these moments, and we don't know what they are when they're happening. And one of those gifts is to be able to spend this precious time with Mason, and also my daughter, Sydney, who was instrumental. And as Mason mentioned, Don, my partner, his father, we have had this sacred time together. That's been the gift. But when you say, how did that go? Everything you once knew, I will say, Mason he is, I think, still a record holder in the city for running. And he was an amazing soccer player. He's an amazing athlete now. And yet in those moments when these things strike, and sometimes even still, the first thing we think about is, what are the losses? So those things immediately, I think we all probably ran through our minds about the comments people would make about Mason as an athlete and watching him run as he was such a graceful runner. It was such a pivotal and an important piece of his life. And so to see that removed, I think there's a place within at least both of us where you realize that there's got to be a new relationship with what has happened, or you won't be able to go on. From the very beginning, literally, Mason talks about waking up in the hospital the next day after the surgery and said, "We need to make a plan. You need to find the best care facility. We need to get a GoFundMe." I think we decided at that time we need to start a CaringBridge. It is overwhelming, as you know, as the person going through Mason with the injury and us as parents, caregivers, family, to update everyone. It's exhausting. It's overwhelming. And I've navigated quite a number of people to CaringBridge for that reason, because you've got to preserve your own energy and you also have to ask for help. And those were those very first moments was like, holy crap, we're in whole new territory here. None of us knew anything really about paralysis and what it meant. None of us understood what was going to happen financially or how that was even going to come together. So there's so many questions. And so CaringBridge was one of those first steps, along with GoFundMe, to be able to tell what happened, to ease it for Mason too, that, he's not getting 10 million text messages. And I don't even know what we did with our phones. We turned them off. We just couldn't handle it. So
I
yeah.
was on Snapchat. I'm not sure what they were doing with their phones,
Yeah,
but
yeah, that was back at the Snapchat days. So, yeah, I think there's just this realization that, wow, life has changed and we need to start charting a path forward.
Mason, so you woke up with a plan.
I have a really deep desire to survive and make the best of what I have. And so that was just part of that, of like, what do we need to do? What are the next steps here? I mean, I remember them coming in and saying, you're probably going to be in a wheelchair, something like that. And I just kind of envision, okay, well, I guess I'll just be like slowing down a little bit in life. Like maybe I was going too fast and I envisioned myself rolling down a sidewalk, looking up at the trees like gracefully, but that doesn't happen. I'm either looking down at the curb to make sure I don't fall out of my chair, or I'm going like 13 miles per hour because I have somewhere to be with my electric attachment. So I like to go places even faster than before. Yeah, I had this kind of optimistic outlook at each step of things. Of course, there were hard moments, but I also don't think the things that my mom experienced maybe at the beginning, or my family, that loss of what I had actually lost, I didn't fully comprehend what I had lost, how deep it was going to go, and just all the things that came along with paralysis.
See, yeah, you've both talked about, the loss. Maybe to someone listening or even me, it seems obvious what you lost, but there must be so many layers to that loss. I want to hear about what you gained too, but if you could take us down that loss path for just a second and help us understand the magnitude of the change.
Yeah, I think the first scary moment was when I went to go look at my legs after getting paralyzed, and I moved the sheet over and I saw like a tube coming out of my member, and I was like, wait a minute, you guys put something in there? Like, what is this? Like the whole wheelchair thing, that was okay, but I don't know about catheters. And so that's when I learned about that. And I was quite horrified as that came along, and I learned about intermittent cathing and that I was going to have to do it every time I wanted to pee. And, here I am 5 years later, and I'm like, I use these awesome catheters that I can use anywhere. And it's like the greatest thing ever. But at the beginning, it was super scary. There were a lot of things like that were terrifying when I first learned about it. But then as time goes on, it just becomes a normal part, like including a bowel program. I mean, that was quite a graphic thing at the beginning, but it's just part of life, right? I think that having those things uncovered one by one in some ways was easier than having somebody walk in and say, hey, you're going to have to deal with this. And I would have just been like terrified. It's like you can only take so much at the beginning and you only have a certain amount of bandwidth because you're dealing with this intense trauma. And so, again, like having CaringBridge there to take that weight off of you when you only have so much energy is super important.
You seem like a tough guy, kind of a badass, honestly. How long did you feel fragile before now? If I get the feeling you could take on the world right now. I mean, how long did it take you to get to resilience again?
You know, I guess there was almost a part of me that it just felt normal to respond in that way, like it was the only option I had. Sometimes that can eventually get to be too much. It's like there's only so much that you can suck it up and move forward before you just collapse and break down and say, "You know what? I'm exhausted physically, emotionally, and everything else." And I think having both of those things is important, but then once you get to that point of collapse, allowing yourself to open up and be like, you know what, my body's calling me to rest, my body's calling me to process. Just having that awareness, I have an immense amount of resiliency, but I've also gone through awful and traumatic in their own right crashes of just pushing too hard and trying to be strong for too long. And I think it's understanding that delicate balance between strength and emotional processing and vulnerability. And that was something that I was like forced to learn. My body forced me to learn it after crashing. But for those first couple of years after paralysis, it was like I felt like I was superhuman, but really I was just having a trauma response. I was having a survival response of like, this giant thing was taken away from me. I need to do everything that I can to build back as much as I can. And that didn't end too well. So I think you have to be careful having too much pride in not stopping. There's nothing wrong with grieving and processing. I think there's too much of a stigma on that. Obviously, you can't do that for the rest of your life, but a certain amount is warranted and healthy.
Absolutely. Stacy, that is wisdom pouring out of your son. Like, I mean, he got it from somewhere and it was probably from you. How did your life change? How has this been seeing Mason grow up in this new way?
Yeah, well, I just will make a little footnote that yes, it's amazing to see the strength pouring out of him, and he is an amazing person. My children are both amazing. They've been through a lot of invisible struggles. What I just want to name is that this is coming from them, and I don't take ownership for how they're showing up in hard times. Both Sydney and Mason have really designed their life from the inside out in a way that they have created, from what they wanted to move toward. Both of them are very driven. And so being able to watch Mason specifically design his life forward, and also as a parent, this is a really hard thing to sometimes make mistakes and watch that unfold live. There were times in his recovery during the first year, especially, where he was pushing his body so hard to walk again that there were some symptoms just from that. I felt like it was a really brittle place for him to be. And at that point, you were 18, 17 moving to 18. And I really tried as a parent, and I think my partner and I both tried not to say, you need to do this. You can't do this. It is Mason's body. Mason had the accident. I did not. I do not know what it is like to live in his body. And we needed to allow him his own agency to make decisions, and also, though, to be there, to be present, to talk through things. And there was a lot of emotion. While Mason immediately, I think you moved on, and not moved on, but moved through. And I call that post-traumatic growth. Like, what am I going to do now? This is a new normal. Where am I moving toward? You did that beautifully. And also, all along the way, and even still, there is grief. there is grief now. There's still, there are different layers as we each come to different understandings of this event and what it has meant for us individually. There's different layers that are shown to us, I think, sort of when we're ready, maybe. But we never stopped having emotions. We always encouraged those to be shared and witnessed because that is part of why trauma lingers in the body, is when we don't allow that space for those really hard words or that anger about what happened even to be present.
My mom's being humble, but when she said allowing for that space, I think that's the biggest thing that she's given me, is a place to have those emotions and share those hard things and not be afraid to talk about something, not be afraid to talk through something. I mean, of course, this accident has brought us closer than we ever thought that we could be. But before that, there was always an openness and an emotional intelligence that was building inside of me from a young age. So much so that when I was 17, right before I got hurt, I had this really deep desire to help people in a way. But I felt like I hadn't been through anything hard. So what did I have to share with people, or how could I relate to them? Literally a couple days after that, I got paralyzed.
I mean, you have a huge social presence, tons of followers on all sorts of platforms. I mean, how has the internet been to you?
Oh man, the internet's given me nothing but love. I've been showing the optimistic side for maybe the past 3 years, and just recently I'm stepping more into the raw reality side of things that are uncomfortable, hard conversations, and definitely getting some more backlash now. But it's like, you need that to have a conversation, right? Like, if everybody already agrees with me, then what good am I doing anyway? It's important for me now, stepping into this new chapter of my life, beyond just the optimism and positivity of like, how can I show both sides of the story? I think it's important to say, yes, you can get through paralysis. Yes, you can still have a good quality of life, but also there are systemic things that need to change so that we can have a more equitable life compared to somebody that's able-bodied or without a disability. I'm just a baby in my advocacy work, nothing crazy, but just simply having some conversations around things that are hurtful towards me because of my disability. Just things that people say that they think come from a good place, but are actually dismissive of my disability or my trauma or whatever it is.
Man, enlighten me. Is that a thing that people don't even know they're doing?
There's a tendency to treat disabled people differently than any other minority in a way, whether that's like you just look different or you're a racial minority. Like, people look at disabled people and they kind of give us like special treatment or something, as if the rules don't apply to us. One really brief example that some people have mixed opinions on is if you were to just walk up to somebody of a different ethnicity or somebody that looks different than you and just say like, well, what happened to you? Why are you different? And it's kind of the same as like going up to a disabled person and saying, what happened to you? Why are you different? And when you draw that comparison, it kind of makes it obvious. Another thing that people might not think about that I was pondering this morning is just when they say, I don't even see your wheelchair when I look at you. And you're like, well, honestly, like, my wheelchair is a big part of my life. It's part of the challenges, the things that I fight for. It's a large part of my identity, just because it determines my life, a lot of things in my life. So when you say I don't see that, it's like you don't see a part of me, because it really is a extension, something very important to us. Without it, we'd just be sitting at home.
Yeah.
And I just will add, I think it's very nuanced, of course, depending on the individual. So honoring what Mason is desiring or what any person is asking is really important. And also just recognizing not in a shameful way, but we all carry bias. I have ableism bias. We all carry bias. And so if we can look at learning from a healthy lens of this is normal. I mean, our brains are great sorting machines, right? There's neuroscience behind the reason that we have bias. And so opening up to what is it that I can learn? And I learn from Mason every day. Some of the things that are really on his heart, he shares about. And I think, wow, I didn't realize that. I am not Mason. He gets to speak his own truth. And sometimes it's tricky for people to hear that. I think we all encourage people to have an open mind and recognize that it's okay to acknowledge that we have bias and then make steps or roll toward how we can change that narrative that we're telling ourselves and making sense of the world. Really be honoring of other people.
And if you could, tell me about your time out in Colorado. How was that transition from injury to recovery?
So 10 days after I got paralyzed, I was flown to Craig Hospital in Denver, Colorado. And it's one of the premier spinal cord and brain injury hospitals in the world. What makes it so special there is they have a team approach. Like every specialty is covered, and then all of those people talk to each other. So PT, OT, rec therapist, case worker, social worker, your doctor, just a nutrition specialist. I mean, anything that you can think of is covered. So that's like number one thing that makes a difference. A second major thing is that there were like 5 other people my age that had just gotten paralyzed that were there. And so having that community and connection was incredibly important. And I think that's another thing too, that like having that social presence, having somewhere where people can follow you. A number of people that have gotten injured that I've heard about, it's like, well, where can I learn more about their journey? Oh, go to CaringBridge, and it's like a place where anybody can learn and connect with people that are newly injured. So not only did it allow my friends and family to connect with me, but I think probably maybe people that were also injured found me through my CaringBridge, but I know that I've found other people through their CaringBridges. And creating that peer connection is like the number one most important and helpful thing after you get paralyzed. Like after you leave the rehab hospital, you pretty much learn from other disabled people about what is going to happen. The community at Craig Hospital was absolutely huge. And then the third thing is just the positivity, optimism, and joy that everybody at that hospital brought. And then it just became kind of contagious. And obviously I was pretty excited and optimistic about things too. And like I enjoyed getting in my wheelchair and going to wheelchair class, learning how to do wheelies. Transfers, not as much. Those kind of sucked at the beginning. It was just an environment of joy and excitement. Above all else, that's what made it really, really special. But there's just so many wonderful traits that Craig Hospital provides.
So was there anyone that you were able to look up to in like a mentor kind of way, maybe? And then have you brought anyone along or helped someone who's new to everything you've already gone through?
There were so many people at that hospital that I looked up to. There were 2 Erics that were really important in my time there. One was my PT. He was amazing. The other was a wheelchair user, a quadriplegic that used a manual chair around the hospital, and he was the peer mentor coordinator. And he's like super jacked and just a really funny, cool dude. And so I always like thought he was the greatest. And eventually, after I got out of the rehab hospital, I got involved with him and started doing peer mentoring and talking to people newly injured. And then that kind of evolved into my social media presence in a way. And when I started doing all the work on social media, newly injured people would reach out to me and like I would just talk to them. At the beginning, there were a handful of guys that I would just spend time on the phone talking to and just, hey, man, like, how you doing? What do you need? How are things going? I don't do that as much anymore. I kind of view like it got to the point where I just couldn't take that much on. And now the work I do on social media is kind of like that advocacy, connection, peer mentoring work.
I will add that here in Duluth, we were able to connect with a good friend of ours now, Brock, who had been to Craig Hospital previously. And he connected us with another friend of Brock's, Bernie, Uncle Bernie. And he was the first one. He's out in Boulder. He had been injured and really nearly lost his life. And he was the first visitor during COVID to see Mason outside of the family. Once word got out that we were a part of that, I think what happens even now is when people in Minnesota are injured, usually one of our friends or connections will reach out to either one or both of us and say, hey, there's a new family. In fact, some families we've known, they've gone through some of these similar kinds of accidents, and we have both in different ways. I will talk and work with the parents, and Mason is more the kid or the adult contact of the person who's been injured. So unfortunately, we became a part of the Craig family, we call it that. And yet also it was the best thing that could have happened in this scenario and still sustains us. We're still involved. Mason still visits there when we're back in Colorado. So just so much gratitude.
I think just taking things day by day, just working with what you have. I mean, I remember thinking early on, I wanted somebody to tell me how it was going to be and just go with that. Like whether that was for walking, like whatever it was, like just tell me what to do and I'll do that. What ended up being the truth is me going out and asking all of the people what they thought and then synthesizing that information and making the decision for myself. It's like you get as much information as you can and then you make the best call. For everything that comes along with paralysis, I would just say there's many options of like how you do your bowel program, what catheter you use, what adaptive equipment you use, what type of e-assist. Like there's always more than one option, it seems. If you're able to try different things out, that's the best play. Because if something's not working, if something's wrong, chances are there is somebody out there who's dealt with something. I would just say like don't stop searching for answers, for guidance, for tools, for feedback, because chances are there's something that can relieve some of the suffering or pain that you're feeling somewhere out there.
Yeah, and I will just add to that, part of what I hear you saying is that community is everything. And the other piece for me, I really feel like we talked about this the day you woke up, is we need help. Unfortunately, I know many families who they're being private. They don't want to do a CaringBridge. They definitely won't do a GoFundMe. I, as a mom, came out of this whole process thinking I am going to do anything I have to do for my kid to get the resources he needs. And that means I'm going to have to set aside my ego, my pride. I'm a helper by nature, by career. That's what I do. And I need help. A lot of help, actually. And so I think the stigma, especially for people who are helpers or doers for others, people want to help. And that's what I remember you saying that morning you woke up. People want to help. They want to know how they can help. They want to do something. We need to give them an avenue for that. And so I think that setting aside the pride and ego, what help, and we don't even know what help you need when you're in the middle of this. And so part of that did come from things that people commented on CaringBridge or connections that people made because we were willing to put our story out there and ask for help and be open to it.
Your story is amazing and so interesting, and you seem to be thriving. I'm sure it's still so hard, but I mean, you seem happy. I mean, it seems like you've got a plan.
I appreciate that, Andy.
Well, I mean it. You seem like you're doing really well. You really do, and you've gone through so much. So, and Stacy, thank you so much for being here too. It was great to hear your side of everything, and good luck with everything going forward. And thank you so much for being here today.
Well, and thank you so much, Andy, and thanks to CaringBridge for providing this really important opportunity for people to share their stories and to ease that overwhelm and exhaustion that can happen by communicating what is happening when something you don't expect happens.